Elizabeth gave this kingdom everything: her childhood, her freedom, her money, even her future. While the crown prince wasted his days at parties, she was the one quietly running the country behind the scenes. She handled government affairs, protected ordinary citizens, built one of the kingdom's most successful trading companies, and prepared herself to become the perfect future queen. And how did they repay her? They accused her of attempted murder without a shred of evidence, cancelled her engagement in front of the entire nobility, threw her into prison, and even her own father refused to save her. But that was their first mistake, because Elizabeth wasn't simply some abandoned noblewoman. Hidden inside her was Beelzebub, one of the legendary 7 great grimoires, a divine artifact capable of recording other people's magic and allowing her to use it herself. And once Elizabeth finally realized that the kingdom she spent her entire life protecting had never truly valued her, she made a decision that would eventually bring that same kingdom to its knees. But before we get there, we need to go back to the night everything fell apart. Inside the brilliantly decorated royal hall of Haldoria Palace, Crown Prince Fried suddenly calls Elizabeth before the assembled nobles. Standing beside him is Sylvia Lockett, the woman he has recently grown suspiciously close to. And without presenting any actual evidence, Fried announces that Elizabeth has committed several terrible crimes. He claims she abused her position to torment Sylvia. He says Elizabeth deliberately pushed her down a staircase. And then he goes even further, accusing his own fiancée of trying to kill the woman he loves. Elizabeth immediately asks to defend herself, but Fried clearly didn't bring her here for an investigation. He already decided the verdict. Before everyone in the hall, he cancels their engagement and announces that Sylvia will become his new fiancée. Then he orders Elizabeth arrested. And what makes this entire situation even more ridiculous is that Elizabeth isn't some random noble daughter. She is the daughter of Chancellor Leiston, one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. More importantly, she may be the single person keeping Haldoria functioning. Because for years, almost every responsibility Fried should have handled was quietly being dumped onto her. Elizabeth had been promised to the crown prince since childhood. From the moment that decision was made, her entire life became preparation for the throne. She studied politics, economics, diplomacy, etiquette, horsemanship, swordsmanship, and practically anything else a future queen might need. And once she entered the palace, the workload only became worse. Night after night, Elizabeth sits behind a desk surrounded by mountains of government documents, while her maid Mireille brings her tea and worries that she is going to work herself sick. Invoices, budgets, reports, petitions, documents that should have been sitting on Fried's desk somehow always ended up on hers. And where is the crown prince while his future wife is running the kingdom? Usually at another party. Mireille absolutely hates it. She cannot understand why Elizabeth keeps accepting responsibilities that belong to someone else. But Elizabeth's answer reveals exactly what kind of person she is. She isn't doing this because she loves Fried. She isn't trying to impress him. She does it because every bad decision made inside this palace eventually affects ordinary people outside it. If Fried mishandles the government, he might be embarrassed for a few days. The citizens could lose their livelihoods. So Elizabeth keeps working, and her influence doesn't stop at the palace. Outside the royal court, she personally created the Fennel Trading Company, which eventually became one of the most important commercial organizations in Haldoria. Instead of using the company to make herself even richer, Elizabeth sends much of its profit toward charitable work and programs supporting ordinary citizens. One day, while walking through town with Mireille, she accidentally overhears several people talking about her. They have no idea Elizabeth herself is standing nearby. The citizens praise her as one of the few nobles willing to defend commoners at court. Some even believe the divide between wealthy nobles and ordinary people would have become far worse without her. Elizabeth becomes embarrassed listening to them, but hearing those words also gives her strength. For her, this is proof that the sleepless nights and endless sacrifices actually mean something. Unfortunately, the royal family sees things differently. When Elizabeth returns to her office, Fried is waiting for her. He wants her to arrange an audience with the president of the Jacko Trading Company. Elizabeth refuses. Jacko has been abusing the smaller businesses beneath its control and taking an unreasonable share of their profits. She isn't even trying to destroy the company. She simply wants the royal family to warn them and temporarily restrict their access to court until their behavior improves. Fried couldn't care less about any of that. His real concern is that he publicly supports Jacko, so punishing the company might make him look bad. He demands to know why Elizabeth cannot simply obey her future husband. And somehow, even after being spoken to like that, Elizabeth still tries to protect him. She explains that scandals involving companies connected to the crown can damage public trust in the royal family. And when the royal family loses credibility, the entire country suffers. After Fried finally leaves, Elizabeth even orders Roberto to keep an eye on him so people with bad intentions cannot manipulate the prince. That's the kind of relationship they have. Fried creates problems. Elizabeth quietly prevents those problems from becoming disasters. Not long afterward, Elizabeth finally gets something almost unbelievable. A day off. Mireille prepares everything for a relaxing trip, and for once, Elizabeth has changed out of her work clothes. Then her father arrives, and just like that, the vacation is dead. Sieg explains that an emergency international summit has been called because of a monster threat. The king must leave the next morning, and as chancellor, Sieg has to travel with him. The problem is that Haldoria's national founding celebration is happening the following week. Foreign guests are already on their way, meaning the event cannot simply be cancelled. So naturally, the king gives Elizabeth responsibility for the entire royal banquet. Her one day of freedom disappears before it even begins, and once again she accepts it. By this point, Haldoria has become so dependent on Elizabeth that the people officially ruling the country can barely function without handing their responsibilities to her. While preparing for the banquet, Elizabeth notices something else. Outside the window, Fried is embracing Sylvia Lockett. Sylvia is the adopted daughter of House Lockett, and her outspoken personality has made her popular at court. It also caught Fried's attention. Mireille expects Elizabeth to be furious. Instead, Elizabeth remains surprisingly calm. She always assumed a future king might have other partners and mentally prepared herself to accept that for the sake of the kingdom. But there is one thing she cannot ignore: rumors. So Elizabeth later calls Sylvia into her office. During the conversation, she notices a bruise on Sylvia's leg. Sylvia casually says she probably injured herself by accident. Elizabeth doesn't threaten her. She doesn't demand that she stay away from Fried. She simply warns Sylvia that becoming too intimate with the crown prince in public can create rumors that damage both his reputation and the kingdom. Sylvia politely agrees. Then she walks into the corridor and immediately begins crying. Almost perfectly on cue, Fried appears. Sylvia suddenly acts as though her injured leg is bothering her, and Fried rushes over to support her. When he notices the bruise, he asks what Elizabeth did. And this is where Sylvia becomes very careful. She never actually says Elizabeth hurt her. Instead, she lowers her eyes, says everything is her own fault, and asks Fried not to speak badly about Elizabeth. Which, of course, makes Fried even more convinced that Elizabeth must have done something terrible. Sylvia never has to tell the lie directly. She simply gives Fried enough room to invent it himself. And judging by the tiny smile she shows while resting in his arms, she knows exactly what she is doing. That brings us back to the royal banquet. The banquet Elizabeth personally organized while the king and Sieg were away. Fried turns the entire celebration into a public trial. He repeats the story about Sylvia falling down the stairs. He claims Elizabeth damaged his reputation. Then he accuses her of attempted murder. Elizabeth asks for a chance to explain herself. Instead, Roberto grabs her shoulders and forces her to kneel. Even Lucas Lebrick, an ambassador from the powerful Yutear Empire, looks shocked by how ridiculous the scene has become. Within minutes, the woman responsible for organizing the banquet, managing government affairs, and supporting half the kingdom's economy is treated like a convicted criminal in the very hall she prepared. And while Elizabeth is dragged away, Sylvia stands quietly beside Fried. The news eventually reaches the international summit. King Blatt is furious. He immediately calls his son an idiot and considers returning home to investigate. This should have been the moment someone finally stood up for Elizabeth. Instead, her own father makes everything worse. Sieg calmly tells the king that Elizabeth should solve the problem herself. According to him, if she cannot overcome something like this, then perhaps she was never worthy of becoming Fried's wife. So rather than defending his daughter against an obviously suspicious accusation, Sieg turns her imprisonment into another test. Even stranger, the king accepts his logic. 1 month passes. Elizabeth remains in prison, and somehow she is still working. Her cell is filled with books and government documents because even after the kingdom throws her behind bars, people continue depending on her to perform their jobs. Eventually, Mireille secretly comes to visit. Elizabeth uses dark magic to stop the guards from interfering and lets her inside. Then Mireille gives her the news she has been waiting for. Nothing. No rescue. No message. No support from the king. No help from her father. After an entire month, Elizabeth finally realizes they genuinely expect her to fix everything herself. Again. But this time, the damage keeps getting worse. Fried has now accused her of treason. He is also targeting the Fennel Trading Company. Using his political influence, he pressures merchants and nobles into supporting a transfer of ownership. If he succeeds, the company Elizabeth built to protect workers and ordinary citizens will become another political weapon controlled by the Crown Prince. And even from inside prison, Elizabeth's first reaction is concern for everyone who will lose their jobs or be exploited if Fried gets control. Mireille has finally had enough. She reminds Elizabeth of where she herself came from. Years earlier, Mireille's family lost everything. She was left with two terrifying possibilities: being sold into slavery or being forced into the red light district. Elizabeth was the person who rescued her. She gave Mireille a safe home. She treated her like a human being instead of property. And because Mireille has spent years beside her, she knows better than anyone how much Elizabeth sacrificed for other people. Yet what did Elizabeth receive in return? The royal family used her. Her father abandoned her. Fried humiliated her. Sylvia manipulated the situation. Roberto forced her onto her knees. And now even ordinary citizens have turned against her. Mireille explains that rumors are spreading throughout the capital. People claim Elizabeth abused Sylvia out of jealousy. Others say she manipulated Fennel for personal profit. Some even believe she planned to overthrow the kingdom. There's no evidence, but the truth no longer matters. The same citizens who once praised Elizabeth now call her a monster. And hearing that finally breaks something inside her. Elizabeth begins remembering everything she gave away. Her childhood, years of study, sleepless nights, canceled vacations, her money, her future, her entire life. And for the first time, she asks herself a simple question. Why? Why should she continue destroying herself for people who abandoned her the second a convenient lie appeared? Mireille apologizes for saying so much. Elizabeth looks at her and quietly thanks her, because Mireille has finally helped her understand. Magic explodes from Elizabeth's body, smashing part of the prison wall. But she doesn't escape. Not yet. Instead, she calmly says she will leave Haldoria in 5 days. And suddenly, the prisoner begins giving orders. She tells Mireille to arrange a meeting with one specific person. As for Fennel, everyone should publicly cooperate with Fried's representatives. But behind the scenes, Elizabeth's most loyal people will begin withdrawing from Haldoria. Funds, employees, information, connections, everything valuable will quietly be moved beyond Fried's control. A few trusted agents will remain behind to report what happens next. Elizabeth isn't just escaping prison. She is preparing to remove the invisible structure that has been holding Haldoria together. Before leaving, Mireille points at the enormous hole in the wall and reminds her that she should probably fix that. And this is where we finally learn just how dangerous Elizabeth really is. Every living person possesses magical power, but through extraordinary training, some people can crystallize that power into something called a divine artifact. Elizabeth's artifact is Beelzebub, one of the 7 great grimoires. Its power allows her to record magic used by other people and reproduce those spells herself. Elizabeth naturally specializes in water and ice magic, but because of Beelzebub, that limitation barely matters. The dark spell she used on the guards wasn't naturally hers. Neither is what she uses next. Elizabeth casts Stone Wall. Every piece of shattered stone rises from the ground and returns to its original place. Within seconds, the prison wall looks untouched. 5 days later, Elizabeth makes her move. She creates an ice doll identical to herself and leaves it sitting inside the cell. Then she uses illusion magic to hide both herself and Mireille. The guards see their prisoner exactly where she is supposed to be. Meanwhile, the real Elizabeth walks straight out. As she passes through the capital wearing a cloak, she hears ordinary people talking about her. They say she deserves execution. They call her charitable work fake. They accuse her of plotting to steal the kingdom. Elizabeth doesn't stop. She doesn't argue. She simply keeps walking, because these people are no longer her responsibility. The man waiting for her is Lucas Lebrick, the Yutear ambassador who witnessed Fried's public accusation. And Lucas already understands what Haldoria apparently does not. They have just thrown away their most valuable asset. Even as a 10-year-old child, Elizabeth created a strategy that caused devastating losses to Yutear during an earlier conflict. Now that same woman has been declared a criminal based on accusations nobody bothered to prove. Lucas is expecting a secret visitor. What he doesn't expect is the King of Haldoria himself. At least that is who appears. Then the disguise melts away. It was Elizabeth. She explains that borrowing the king's appearance was simply the easiest way to pass the guards. Then she gets straight to the point. She wants asylum in Yutear. Lucas warns her that everything may change once the real king and Sieg return. Elizabeth says she doesn't care anymore. This stopped being about Fried and Sylvia a long time ago. Her father abandoned her. The royal family abandoned her. The citizens believed the worst about her without evidence. And if Haldoria suffers after she leaves, then Haldoria can solve its own problems. Lucas asks what she plans to do once she reaches the Empire. Elizabeth slowly removes her engagement ring. Ice spreads across the gold. Then she crushes it in her hand. She tells Lucas she will never forgive the people who betrayed her. And from this moment forward, the intelligence she once used to make Haldoria prosperous will be used for something completely different. Revenge. But Elizabeth isn't asking Yutear to immediately invade her homeland. That would be too simple. She wants the Empire's military power behind her as protection while she destroys Haldoria in her own way. And when she succeeds, Yutear will receive part of the benefits. Lucas agrees to consider the proposal, but first, Elizabeth must relocate to his territory and remain under his supervision. She accepts. That night, a carriage bearing the imperial emblem leaves Haldoria without being stopped. During the journey, Elizabeth reveals another terrifying advantage. She tells Lucas about what she calls the Grimoire of Wisdom, a divine artifact capable of memorizing books and recording everything its owner sees or hears. Thanks to it, Elizabeth carries an enormous amount of information about Haldoria's government, economy, military, and political weaknesses. Then she casually admits something even more interesting. The Grimoire of Wisdom doesn't exist. It is simply the false identity she created for Lucifer, another of the 7 great grimoires. Even the king and her father never knew the truth. Lucas now realizes that Elizabeth isn't arriving in Yutear as an ordinary refugee. She is practically a walking archive of Haldoria's deepest secrets, and surrendering her would probably be worth far less than keeping her. When they finally reach the Lebric territory, Elizabeth notices how warmly the population welcomes Lucas. Clearly, unlike Haldoria's leaders, he is actually respected by the people he governs. Elizabeth barely reaches his estate before making her first request. She wants permission to create a new trading company. Because revenge is expensive, and anger doesn't pay employees. Lucas agrees. Then Elizabeth asks him to loan her 100 gold coins. That gets his attention. So Elizabeth offers collateral. Not property, not jewelry, herself. Using a magical contract, she promises to repay 200 gold coins within 1 year. If she fails, Lucas may sell her into slavery or claim ownership of her directly. Any sensible person would probably reconsider the business plan at that point. Elizabeth signs without hesitation. She tells Lucas that 1 year from now, his table will be covered in gold. The company doesn't even exist yet, and Elizabeth has already guaranteed 100% return. Her first headquarters doesn't exactly inspire confidence. For 1 gold coin, she purchases a ruined building with broken windows, rotten wood, and enough dust to make Mireille question whether they bought an office or discovered an ancient tomb. Elizabeth doesn't care. It's cheap, and more importantly, it belongs to her. She also asks Mireille to stop calling her by her old title. Elizabeth Leiston, the crown prince's fiancée, was left behind in Haldoria. From now on, she is Elizabeth Leis. 1 week later, the abandoned house has been transformed into the Trader Trading Company. Now they just need something to sell. Mireille expects Elizabeth to restart the luxury cosmetics business that made Fennel successful. But they currently lack the workers, equipment, and supply lines. So Elizabeth chooses something much simpler. Soap. A small pink bar of soap. Mireille tests it and immediately realizes the quality is far better than anything ordinary people can buy. Still, she struggles to imagine how soap is supposed to fund the destruction of a kingdom. Elizabeth explains that the soap itself is not the real goal. It is easy to manufacture. Almost everyone needs it, and unlike expensive cosmetics, it can reach a broad range of customers. More importantly, it can open doors. Elizabeth doesn't only need money. She needs relationships, influence, patrons, people with enough status to protect her business and enough curiosity to spread its name. So Mireille gathers information about important people throughout the territory, and Elizabeth chooses her first target, Father Louis of the Libris Church. She visits his chapel pretending to be nothing more than a new merchant asking for prayers for her company. During their conversation, several children run inside and proudly announce that they earned a coin that day. Louis explains that the church operates an orphanage nearby. Despite support from Lucas, they are struggling financially, so some of the children perform small jobs around town to help. Louis feels terrible about it. Elizabeth sees something different. Those children are helping because they know the priest genuinely cares about them. She makes a donation, and, being Elizabeth, she disguises her kindness as business logic. Customers are the most important thing a company can have, she says. Children eventually grow into adults. Supporting the person caring for future customers is therefore a long-term investment. Father Louis can tell exactly what she is doing. She is using the language of business because admitting she simply wanted to help would embarrass her. But this relationship is going to become far more valuable than either of them realizes. Meanwhile, Mireille has been distributing free soap samples among servants working in noble households. The launch is ready. Elizabeth deliberately keeps the supply limited and prices the product only slightly higher than normal soap. Mireille argues that something this good could easily be sold for much more. But Elizabeth isn't chasing maximum profit yet. She's chasing demand. If everybody can buy something immediately, it becomes ordinary. If only selected people can get it, everyone else starts wondering why they were excluded. Elizabeth wants Trader to become the first name people think of whenever they hear the word soap. The strange thing is, it works. 3 months later, demand has exploded. Soap is selling constantly. Rosewater, lotion, and shampoo production is booked out. Customers keep appearing because they hear other influential people talking about Trader. But Elizabeth still refuses to sell to everyone. Potential buyers are investigated. Only selected customers receive limited supplies. And part of the company's profit continues going to churches and charities. So while Trader earns money, it also builds loyalty among groups other merchants ignore. Now Elizabeth is ready for the second stage. One day, while eating outside with Mireille, she deliberately starts discussing the company's soap formula. She says the recipe is locked securely inside Trader's vault. Sitting nearby is a man named Glans, and he hears everything, exactly as Elizabeth intended. The Guzzle Trading Company has been losing customers because of Trader. His president is furious. His employees keep telling him Trader is small and the losses are mostly limited to cosmetics. But the president realizes the real danger. Elizabeth's customers are influential nobles. Even people who cannot buy Trader products have started criticizing Guzzle and asking why the company doesn't carry the new brand. Attacking Elizabeth openly could therefore anger half the people Guzzle depends on. Then Glans arrives with wonderful news. Trader's formula is stored in a vault, and greed immediately does the rest. Guzzle decides he will steal the recipe. Then he can manufacture the same soap, sell it for several times Elizabeth's price, and profit from the reputation she created. He thinks he has discovered the perfect shortcut. What he doesn't realize is that Elizabeth has been waiting for him to take it. At the same time, Mireille receives news from Haldoria. Sylvia has now officially been recognized as Fried's fiancée. So what happened at the banquet is no longer temporary. The position Elizabeth spent her entire life preparing for has legally been handed to Sylvia. Then Mireille gives her something worse. An official arrest warrant has been issued for Elizabeth. And the man who helped legitimize the accusations is her father. Sieg personally supported the process. The man who once promised to do anything necessary for Haldoria has apparently decided that sacrificing his own daughter counts as part of the job. Elizabeth is furious, but instead of losing control, she turns that anger into fuel. Her revenge is no longer an emotional promise. It is becoming a plan. And right on schedule, that plan begins moving. 2 investigators from the Merchants Guild arrive at Trader. Someone claims the company's soap has caused severe injuries. Elizabeth goes with them voluntarily. Laboratory tests quickly prove that Trader's real products contain nothing dangerous. There are also no injury reports connected to any legitimate customer. Before leaving, Elizabeth asks to examine the supposedly poisonous soap. It looks almost identical to hers, but someone clearly manufactured it incorrectly, which is exactly what she expected, because the formula inside Trader's vault was never complete. Elizabeth split the recipe into two parts. One half was stored in the vault, the other remained with her. Without the missing neutralizing ingredients, anyone trying to manufacture soap from the stolen recipe would create something dangerous. In other words, she didn't simply protect the formula. She left bait, and Guzzle swallowed it whole. The investigators trace the counterfeit products back to his company. Guzzle is arrested for selling dangerous soap, theft, and unlawful entry. Elizabeth later meets him and demands compensation for the damage done to Trader's reputation. Guzzle arrogantly refuses. He insists that the guild cannot force him to surrender anything and sarcastically tells Elizabeth to bring someone important from the Libris church if she believes she deserves protection. Then the door opens. Father Lewis walks in. Guzzle's confidence disappears instantly. Lewis calmly warns him that Elizabeth is a major supporter of the church. Someone who damages her reputation without cause is not going to be ignored. Elizabeth then presents her idea of fair compensation. Guzzle's entire company, its facilities, its supplies, its employees, its resources, and his personal assets. One stolen formula has now placed everything he owns on the table. But the best part of Elizabeth's trap hasn't even been revealed yet. After Guzzle loses control of the business, the guild mentions that someone may have encouraged him to steal the formula. That person is Grans Carton, Guzzle's former accountant. There isn't enough evidence to prosecute him. Elizabeth says that won't be necessary, because Grans now works for her. The man enters Trader expecting punishment. Instead, Elizabeth gives him money and promotes him. Grans was never Guzzle's spy. He was hers. Long before the counterfeit incident, Mireille secretly approached him. His only job was to let Guzzle discover that the formula was supposedly inside Trader's vault. Elizabeth understood exactly what kind of man Guzzle was. She didn't have to force him to commit a crime. She simply placed an opportunity in front of him and allowed greed to make the decision. But Grans didn't do this for money alone. Elizabeth accompanies him home. Inside, his wife is sitting beside their unconscious daughter, Lunoa. The girl is covered in bandages. Her hands, neck, and part of her face are badly injured, and the local apothecary has already said there is little hope of recovery. This is why Grans agreed to help. He needed money for his child. Elizabeth approaches the bed. Then Beelzebub appears. She tells the family the artifact merely amplifies her spells, keeping its real ability secret. In truth, Elizabeth once recorded the healing magic of Haldoria's archbishop. And although healing is not her natural specialty, Beelzebub allows her to reproduce it. Blue light fills the room. Lunoa's wounds begin disappearing. Then the girl opens her eyes. Grans and his wife burst into tears. They ask how they could ever repay Elizabeth. She simply reminds Grans that she promised to help his daughter. That's the difference between the people around Elizabeth now and the ones she left behind. Greedy men like Guzzle receive traps. People who keep their word receive something far more valuable than money. 1 month later, Elizabeth returns to Lucas, and just as promised, his table is covered in gold. The 100 coins he loaned her have already produced returns far beyond his expectations. At this point, he stops treating Trader like a temporary experiment. He grants Elizabeth greater freedom to travel throughout Yusha and recognizes that giving her asylum may benefit the Empire far more than anyone first imagined. Trader is growing. Her political protection is growing. And so is her network. Lunoa has also completely recovered. The girl now works enthusiastically at the company and turns out to possess something extremely valuable: item appraisal magic. She can identify the characteristics and potential value of merchandise. Elizabeth takes her on as an apprentice and begins teaching her both commerce and magic. We also discover that Beelzebub isn't Elizabeth's only divine artifact. She possesses Belphegor, another of the 7 great grimoires. Belphegor allows her to create contracts with magical creatures, spirits, and demons in exchange for whatever price they demand. Elizabeth places a silver coin into a magic circle. The coin dissolves. Small white creatures appear, take her messages, and fly away. More pieces are moving into position. 6 months pass. trader absorbs several additional companies. Employees, factories, distribution networks, everything expands. The ruined building Elizabeth bought for 1 gold coin has grown into a serious commercial organization. And now she wants access to the imperial capital. Before leaving, she places Granz temporarily in charge. The former accountant who helped destroy Gazelle is stunned that Elizabeth trusts him with the company. But she has been watching him for months. She knows exactly what he can handle. Then Elizabeth leaves with Mireille and Lunoa. For Lunoa, the trip is also part of her training. Elizabeth explains that a good merchant doesn't simply study products. She studies people, money, status, fear, desire, reputation inside the capital. All of them move together. Before reaching the city, however, the carriage enters an isolated forest road. And almost immediately, bandits appear. Their leader sees several women and a young girl and assumes they will be easy prey. Elizabeth steps out alone. One of the men laughs. Then an ice spell knocks his companion unconscious before Elizabeth even finishes raising her hand. The others realize they are facing a mage and rush her, hoping to stop another spell. Elizabeth draws her sword. Apparently, she doesn't need magic for people like them. Within moments, the entire group is defeated. The leader drops to his knees and begs for mercy. He claims he used to be a farmer, but crushing taxes left him with no other choice. Elizabeth understands that poverty may explain how someone became desperate, but explanation is not the same as innocence. Bandits don't only steal coins. They attack merchants who spent months building those goods. They leave families without income, and sometimes they kill travelers who were simply unlucky enough to use the same road. So Elizabeth refuses to pretend surrender erases everything that happened before it. She eliminates the threat and tells Lunoa to remember what she saw. It's a harsh lesson, but an important one. Elizabeth can heal a dying child because that child deserves compassion. And she can kill someone who repeatedly harms innocent people because allowing him to continue may cost even more lives. Her kindness now has boundaries. A little later, they find a nun standing beside the road. Her name is Tita. She is traveling toward the capital and asks for a ride. Lunoa is fascinated when she learns what traveling nuns do. They visit remote communities and offer free healing, especially in areas without doctors. Tita treats it like ordinary work, but Lunoa immediately admires her. During the journey, the girl asks why this region has so many bandits. Elizabeth points toward the terrible road beneath them. Infrastructure, she explains, isn't just about convenience. A competent lord repairs roads. That makes it easier for merchants to transport food and products. Trade increases. Prices stay manageable. Businesses grow. The government collects more taxes. An incompetent ruler sees road maintenance only as an expense and cuts funding. Transportation becomes harder. Prices rise. Farmers lose customers. People become desperate. Some eventually turn to crime. Then merchants have to hire guards, which pushes prices even higher. Saving a small amount from one government budget can quietly create enormous losses everywhere else. And almost as if the universe wants to prove Elizabeth's point, another group of bandits appears. Elizabeth prepares to fight. Tita cheerfully offers to take half. Since she is standing beside a nun, Elizabeth decides it would probably be inappropriate to slaughter everyone. So she restrains her opponents. Tita, meanwhile, charges into her half of the bandits, swinging a staff like she has been waiting all week for this opportunity. One captured man begs her for mercy. He reminds her that the Libris faith teaches forgiveness to sinners. Tita agrees. All humans make mistakes, she says. Those who truly regret their actions can receive God's forgiveness. The bandit looks relieved. Then Tita adds that bandits don't count as humans, and starts beating him again. At that point, Elizabeth begins wondering why she bothered showing restraint in the first place. By the time they reach an inn that night, Tita has also sold some valuables taken from the criminals. She offers Elizabeth half the money. Elizabeth refuses and tells her to donate it to the church. Tita immediately hugs her while crying about what an incredibly devout woman she is. Elizabeth is far less concerned with the compliment than with the fact that Tita is wiping her nose all over her clothes. Lunoa notices something during all of this. Elizabeth looks genuinely happy. Mireille explains why. Back in Haldoria, Elizabeth could never relax. She had to control every expression. Every decision, every word. One small mistake could become ammunition for someone else. Since leaving, she has finally started behaving like a normal person. She jokes. She gets embarrassed. She enjoys meals. She spends time with people who don't expect perfection from her. Haldoria didn't only steal Elizabeth's work. It stole most of her youth, and escaping has finally returned part of it. Ironically, while Elizabeth's life improves, Haldoria begins collapsing. Freed has decided to distribute enormous quantities of the kingdom's grain reserves to poor citizens. He thinks this proves he is generous. When Roberto warns him that the national reserves are being drained, Freed argues that Elizabeth also helped the poor. Roberto has to explain the obvious difference. Elizabeth usually used her own money, and rather than simply handing out food forever, she created jobs and economic programs so people could eventually support themselves. Freed copied the part that earned public praise without understanding the system behind it. When he discovers the grain is running out, his solution is even worse. He simply orders the program stopped and says the poor can starve. Roberto can only stare at the documents afterward. And for the first time, he fully understands what Elizabeth had been doing. Whenever someone inside the palace made a stupid decision, she quietly repaired the damage before anyone noticed. Now she is gone, and the mistakes are starting to remain mistakes. Elsewhere in the palace, a woman named Rosalia Fadgar watches Freed and Sylvia together and reaches a very different conclusion from the official story. She doesn't believe Elizabeth was some jealous monster. From what Rosalia can see, the real tragedy is that a capable woman spent years carrying an idiot who never appreciated her. Eventually, Elizabeth's group reaches the imperial capital. After saying goodbye to Tita, they rent a surprisingly expensive room at a high-class inn. Lunoa wonders why they need somewhere so luxurious. Elizabeth turns it into another business lesson. They have entered the capital as representatives of trader. Appearance matters. If the president of a rapidly growing company stays somewhere obviously cheap and poorly maintained, potential partners may begin questioning the company's finances or credibility. And more importantly, this city is filled with people watching each other. They need privacy and security. That evening, an elderly man arrives. He almost calls Elizabeth by her former name before correcting himself. This is Arnaud Longley, one of her old commercial subordinates from Haldoria. He remained loyal after she disappeared and has already prepared several things for her arrival. Possible residence, commercial building, contacts, information. The following day, Arnaud shows Elizabeth an excellent multi-story property. It costs slightly more than planned, but the location and available space are too good to ignore. Elizabeth buys it immediately. Trader now has a home inside the imperial capital. But Mireille sees another problem. As the company grows, she cannot remain beside Elizabeth every minute. They need a personal attendant. The difficulty is trust. Elizabeth is still officially wanted by Haldoria. If a servant recognizes her as Elizabeth Leiston and reports her identity, years of preparation could collapse. So Mireille suggests something Elizabeth doesn't particularly like: a magically contracted slave. Lunoa is uncomfortable when they enter the first slave establishment. People sit behind bars while the owner talks about them like inventory. Elizabeth doesn't choose anyone. A magical contract may guarantee obedience, but she refuses to treat another person carelessly simply because the law allows it. At a second establishment, things are noticeably different. A young man guides them inside, and Elizabeth recognizes the name Cedric Trading Company. Its owner, Cedric Ruins, is famous throughout the merchant community as the educator. He is also connected to the Imperial Merchant Guild Council, an organization of 7 enormously influential merchants whose power reaches directly into politics. So Elizabeth's simple search for an attendant has suddenly become her first encounter with the highest level of imperial commerce. Cedric already knows who she is. Trader expanded far too quickly to remain unnoticed. The most powerful merchants in the capital have started paying attention. Cedric shows them his training system. People here learn arithmetic, reading, writing, cooking, sewing, combat, and anything else suited to their abilities. One instructor became a slave because of debt, but his talent for mathematics now allows him to teach others. Cedric's philosophy is simple. Treating people only as tools limits what they can become. Train them, keep them healthy, develop their strengths. and eventually they become far more valuable. Elizabeth immediately understands. It is almost the same philosophy she used at Fennel and now uses at Trader. Then Cedric introduces the candidate he believes fits her needs. Misha Tale, a young Catkin woman who is so nervous she can barely introduce herself without stuttering. She doesn't have much practical experience, but her training scores are excellent. Her race also gives her strong endurance and physical ability, which is useful considering how often Elizabeth's carriage seems to find bandits. Elizabeth chooses her immediately. The magical contract is transferred. Before Misha leaves, Cedric tells her to serve her new employer well. Misha breaks down crying as she thanks him for everything he did for her. That reaction tells Elizabeth more about Cedric than any business speech could. Only 2 days later, Misha is already adapting incredibly fast. She manages Elizabeth's schedule and remembers almost every task. Elizabeth doesn't treat her like a disposable servant. She corrects her mistakes, teaches her, and starts developing her into another genuine member of Trader. Meanwhile, the company prepares its first major product for the capital. Lipstick. The opportunity to launch it comes almost perfectly. Lady Melanie, an influential noblewoman, invites Elizabeth to a private gathering. A room filled with wealthy women interested in cosmetics is basically free advertising. At the event, Melanie introduces Elizabeth as Trader's president and publicly announces that the cosmetics she uses were created by her. The other women immediately become interested. They already admire Melanie's appearance. Now they want whatever she is using. Elizabeth tells them the capital branch is not officially open yet, and because production is limited, Trader will initially operate through membership. People personally introduced by Melanie will receive priority. It's clever on several levels. Trader gains customers. The customers feel special. And Melanie becomes more influential because access to Elizabeth's products now passes through her. Everyone wins, especially Elizabeth. Then she reveals a new pink lipstick. The entire room notices. Elizabeth promises to send every guest several shades to test before opening day. By the time she leaves, Trader already has wealthy customers waiting for a store that technically doesn't exist yet. A single tube of lipstick has opened the door to Imperial High Society. That night, Elizabeth and Mireille are walking back when they hear shouting from an alley. 3 men have surrounded Tita. Apparently, they believe she cheated during a card game. Tita calmly asks whether they have proof. Then she blasts the first man with a snow bullet spell. By the time Elizabeth reaches them, Tita has already handled the situation. Mireille immediately points out that this is not exactly how most nuns spend their evenings. Tita almost admits to cheating, then quickly claims she was actually spreading God's love inside the tavern. And apparently God's love was somehow arranging the cards in her favor. Before Mireille can question that logic any further, Tita suddenly claims she hears suffering people somewhere in the distance and runs away. Elizabeth can only watch her disappear. Somehow, knowing Tita is still causing trouble makes the capital feel a little more familiar. Back in Haldoria, things are getting worse. King Blatt finally admits that domestic administration is barely functioning. His attention is consumed by international affairs. Freed is useless, and the person who handled most of the government has been branded a traitor. So the king summons Rosalia Fadgar and asks her to take over Elizabeth's work. Rosalia immediately understands the irony. The royal family discarded one highly capable woman. Now they are asking another woman to clean up the mess. When the king calls Elizabeth a traitor, Rosalia is careful not to openly challenge him. But once she sees Elizabeth's old office, even she is shocked. Documents cover everything. The workload is absurd. Only now does Rosalia understand how much Elizabeth had actually been doing. And she realizes something else. If Elizabeth truly wanted to betray Haldoria, the kingdom would already be in much worse condition. A woman with her intelligence, contacts, magical power, and knowledge of government secrets could have caused catastrophic damage. The fact that Haldoria is merely struggling means one thing. Elizabeth hasn't seriously attacked yet. In Yusha, Lucas reaches a similar conclusion. He invites Elizabeth for coffee and explains that he has already reported everything to the Emperor. The Empire is still observing her. They are not officially supporting her revenge. But Trader is creating jobs, generating money, building commercial connections, and even placing its products in the hands of Yutear's empress and princess. As long as Elizabeth benefits the empire, the government has no reason to stop her. Then Lucas asks the question he has been waiting to ask. How exactly does she plan to destroy Haldoria? Elizabeth picks up a red rose. Everything she has done so far, she explains, is preparation. Building traitor, recruiting talented people, connecting herself to the church, entering noble society, winning the favor of imperial clients, creating relationships with powerful merchants. She is surrounding herself with interests that Haldoria cannot attack without provoking half of Yutear. Then ice spreads across the rose in her hand. Elizabeth says her real plan will accomplish two things at the same time. It will make Yutear stronger and crush Haldoria. Then the frozen rose shatters. The revenge Lucas has been waiting for still hasn't technically begun, but every road leading toward it is now open. Meanwhile, Fried remains blissfully unaware of how dangerous the situation has become. At the training ground, he defeats a knight and proudly lectures him about serving the kingdom. The moment Fried walks away, the other knights reveal what actually happened. His opponent deliberately lost. Nobody wants to embarrass the crown prince and get reassigned to some miserable border fortress. One soldier quietly says that if Fried worked even half as hard as Elizabeth did, he might actually become respectable. Fried overhears the name. Instead of wondering why his supposedly traitorous former fiancée is still being praised by his own knights, he becomes furious. Soon afterward, Sylvia is approached by officials who want to begin preparing her for life as the future queen. They don't expect perfection. They simply want her to begin studying. Sylvia refuses. She doesn't want to learn any of it. Fried immediately tells her that she doesn't need to. Apparently, the next crown princess of Haldoria doesn't need politics, economics, diplomacy, or administration. Her only job is to stay beside Fried and make him feel better, which honestly explains quite a lot about where this country is heading. Later, Fried and Sylvia are shopping for jewelry when a merchant notices the prince complaining about constantly being compared to Elizabeth. She realizes that what he really wants is an achievement, something that proves he is capable. She suggests that military success could restore his authority. And the moment the conversation turns toward Yutear, something dangerous begins forming in Fried's head. Before the merchant can go very far, Rosalia barges into the room carrying a huge pile of government documents. She looks at the jewelry covering the table, then at Fried, then at Sylvia, and she completely loses patience. Everyone else in the palace is working day and night because of the prince's decisions, while he is sitting here shopping. Sylvia accuses Rosalia of jealousy. Rosalia actually laughs. Respect, she explains, cannot be ordered. It has to be earned. Then she asks Fried what exactly he has done to earn anyone's respect. Fried tries hiding behind his title. Bad idea. Rosalia reminds him that House Fadgar commands an enormous military force. The crown cannot afford to casually make her family an enemy. Fried turns red with anger but doesn't dare punish her. Rosalia drops the documents onto the table. His assignment is simple. Sign them. That is apparently the highest level of government responsibility anyone currently trusts him to handle. Looking at Fried and Sylvia, Rosalia finally understands something about Elizabeth. She never lost to Fried. He was never even her opponent. For years, she simply carried him. And the second she stopped, everyone discovered how helpless he really was. Unfortunately, Fried responds to humiliation exactly the way you would expect. He finds a document concerning financial aid to one of Haldoria's vassal states. He calls the country's people parasites. Then he decides to personally alter the aid policy. No analysis, no diplomatic planning, no understanding of what may happen afterward, just pride. At first, this looks like another stupid administrative decision. Soon, however, something far more dangerous happens. Back in Yutear, Trader continues expanding. Elizabeth purchases land near Sharona village in the Lebrick territory. Her goal is to create a large production center where ingredients can be grown, processed, and manufactured in one location. She is also negotiating with companies whose businesses have been damaged by Trader's rise. Some may be absorbed peacefully. Those who refuse may not survive commercially. Then Arnaud rushes into the room with urgent news. The Kingdom of Sarges has declared war on Yutear, and it has invaded Lebrick territory. Sarges is a relatively small vassal state connected to Haldoria. Because of the mountains and dense forests along the border, a place called Brocken Gorge is one of the only routes capable of supporting a large army. Immediately beyond that passage is Sharona village, the same area where Elizabeth just invested in her production center. So this war isn't some distant political problem. It has landed directly on her doorstep. Brocken Fortress has only around 500 or 600 defenders. Sarges appears to have roughly 1,200 soldiers, perhaps 1,500 at most. Normally, the fortress and terrain should allow a smaller defending force to survive for several days, long enough for reinforcements to arrive. And Lucas has already mobilized. He leads 1,800 soldiers toward the border and sends an advance unit ahead. On paper, the situation is dangerous but manageable. Then Brocken Fortress falls in a single day. Something is wrong. Reports describe a mysterious warrior wearing dark armor and carrying a weapon glowing with white light. An elite unit breaks through the defenses with terrifying speed. Lucas's advance force is destroyed before his main army can even reach the battlefield. And nobody recognizes these soldiers. They don't match Sarges's normal military. They aren't connected to any famous mercenary company. No one knows who they are. That bothers Elizabeth, but something else bothers her even more. The king of Sarges is known as a relatively peaceful ruler. Starting a hopeless war against a much larger empire makes very little sense. So why now? Did Sarges truly choose this war? Was someone manipulating them? Or is another power using Sarges as a mask? Elizabeth decides she is going to the front herself. Mireille immediately begins organizing food, medicine, mercenaries, and adventurers. Others warn Elizabeth that appearing near the battlefield increases the chance that Haldoria discovers where she is living. She doesn't care. Sharona is now part of her commercial network. People there depend on trade, and Elizabeth has already learned what happens when powerful people ignore the lives affected by their decisions. This time, she refuses to do the same. Using Lucas's official support, Trader posts a high-level mission for adventurers willing to enter an active war zone. The payment is more than double the normal rate. Only experienced fighters are accepted. Among the groups responding are Sharp Blade, Blazing Fist, Dragon Fang Scales, and several mercenary companies. Some are coming for the money. Others have personal reasons. For Elsa and Lisa of Sharp Blade, the region under attack is close to home. Before departing, one of the adventurers notices something strange. Everyone has been told to carry only 2 days of food. That makes absolutely no sense for a military expedition. Unless Elizabeth has another secret. She decides that since these people will be fighting beside her, they deserve to know part of the truth. A purple magic circle appears. Then another grimoire materializes. Mammon, yet another of the 7 great grimoires. From its storage space, Elizabeth removes an entire crate of supplies. Mammon contains enough resources to support roughly 100 people for months. The individual food packs are only emergency supplies in case someone becomes separated. The adventurers stare at her. Most of them assumed they were being hired by a wealthy merchant. Now they are beginning to realize their employer may be more dangerous than the people they are marching to fight. Elizabeth orders everyone to keep Mammon secret. During the journey, some still debate exactly how powerful she is. One estimates that her magic may rival a court mage. Another points out that anyone who judges Elizabeth by her appearance probably won't survive long enough to make that mistake twice. When night falls, the group establishes a defensive camp. They dig trenches and prepare positions. Elizabeth inspects everything, then decides it still isn't enough. Beelzebub appears. She casts stone wall and creates elevated defensive positions around the camp. Experienced adventurers recognize that the extraordinary part isn't simply the spell. It's the divine artifact, but nobody asks unnecessary questions. People who survive dangerous jobs learn when curiosity is healthy, and when it might get them killed. Then one of the scouts returns, and suddenly, the war becomes much darker. A nearby village has been occupied by armed men. From a distant hill, the scout saw weapons throughout the settlement. Almost no civilians were moving freely. Several villagers appeared to be dragged away. There was blood between the houses. She only counted around 10 enemies, but that was merely the number visible from outside. Elizabeth immediately asks the obvious question. Were they Sarge's soldiers? Nobody knows, and that creates another problem. Attacking civilians like this doesn't match the reputation of Sarge's as king. So these men could be regular soldiers ignoring orders, deserters, mercenaries, the mysterious elite troops that destroyed Brocken, or someone else entirely. Mireille asks Elizabeth what they should do. They still have supplies to deliver, a war to investigate, a larger army somewhere ahead of them. Elizabeth doesn't hesitate. The supplies can wait a little longer. The people being dragged from their homes may not have that time. She orders everyone to prepare for combat. And this is where Elizabeth's new life becomes something much bigger than revenge. Because she left Haldoria believing she was finished protecting kingdoms. But now another kingdom is moving toward war. An unknown military force has appeared on the battlefield. Civilians are disappearing. Her business, her allies, and the people under her protection are all directly in the path of the invasion. And the deeper Elizabeth looks into this war, the more it begins to feel like someone behind the scenes is moving pieces on the board. The exact kind of game Elizabeth understands better than almost anyone. So while Haldoria continues collapsing without the woman it betrayed, Elizabeth draws her sword and prepares to enter an occupied village. Not as the crown prince's discarded fiancé, not as the prisoner they accused of treason, but as Elizabeth Leis, the merchant, mage, strategist, and future enemy Haldoria created with its own hands. And if the people behind this invasion truly believe she's just another wealthy merchant caught in the middle of their war, they're about to make the same mistake as everyone who betrayed her before.